when I talk to growers around my region and really all over the Midwest, someone somewhere every fall has a struggle with down corn. Hi, I'm Dave Murphy. One of the things that I've noticed too about our home operation, kind of where we farm at, is about 2 or 3 years out of 5, we're dealing with some or sometimes a lot of fields that have some down corn in them. And I guess that's probably because I can see wind turbines from pretty much every one of those fields. So it's a pretty heavy wind belt here, looking across Iowa and through north central Illinois where I'm at. We call it down corn, but really in my mind there's kind of 3 different types. The first type is what everybody calls goosenecked corn, or corn that went down there late June, early July, when corn's still in the vegetative stage. It's still growing up. So when the corn goes down, then it kind of compensates, grows against gravity, and tries to do the best it can for the rest of the season. The second kind you have is what's after pollination, when you're already in the reproductive stages, and the corn plant's not going to grow any taller, so it's pretty much going to stay down and it's not going to try and grow back up or anything like that. It's just going to have to deal with that condition. And the third type that's probably most common for all of us is when we have that late season windstorm. So later in the season, we've cannibalized all the starch and sugar out of the stalk, and it's pretty vulnerable to a medium or not even that bad of a windstorm, and it'll go down. So when it comes to harvesting that crop, though, to me there's a similar combine operating condition that you deal with all those different types. The first thing you're doing is you've got slow ground speed. You know, you're moving that combine slow, trying to pick up as much as you can. The second struggle is you've got ears close to the ground, or sometimes even on the ground, and that can be a real struggle to deal with that condition. And the third thing that makes it a challenge to harvest is we've got stalks entering the corn head at every which angle, particularly with those late season windstorms like what I saw in some of my fields this year. We've got corn plants that are leaning across the row, down the same row. They're all over the place. So stalks that coming into the corn head at a strange angle is always tough to deal with. When we deal with as much down corn as we do, and a lot of my customers do, if there's a tool on the market that'll help ease some of that pain, we latch onto that pretty fast and put it to the test. And 360 Yield Savers are one of those tools that have really made a difference for us since we started running them a few years ago. You know, they're just more aggressive when you're pulling that crop material in. You've got brushes on every single link versus just our standard gathering chains that we used to have, where you've only got maybe 6 or 8 of those steel lugs per side. You're just not getting as much friction and as much pull trying to get that plant up into the corn head. There's more points of contact to push that in, and I think it reaches out a little further with those brushes sticking off the links. As when we're running the corn head low to the ground like that, to me, we want to reach out and pull as much plant and hopefully ears into that corn head as we can to try and scavenge as much yield as we can out of that down corn situation. Picking up those low hanging ears is really worth the time of slowing the ground speed and doing anything we can do to try and capture those and pull them in. Just the way going to draper belt headers has improved my soybean harvest over the last few years, Yield Savers have improved my corn harvesting. The first effect that we have is cushioning. So we're cushioning that ear as we're trying to feed it in at a slow speed. It also gives us very even feeding, similar to what a draper belt does versus a lug chain only, where you're kind of getting intermittent push. And lastly, we found we picked up a couple bushels in shatter loss by going to a draper. Again, we found those same couple bushels by reducing the shatter loss and putting Yield Savers on the corn head. In down corn, we're in an effort to capture the most ears possible. And we're also sending a lot of plant material through the machine in order to accomplish that. So, like most of you, I'm running my corn head as close to the ground as possible. And one of the other things that I can do, Yield Saver allows me to run a faster head speed and pull more plant material in, and also allow the stalk rolls to process that stalk down. You want to pull as much down through those snapping rolls as possible, because we're already sending the majority of the plant through the machine. So the more we can get pulled down with the snapping rolls, the better. If you use that over-speeding head technique with a standard gathering chain, you end up battering those ears back and forth on their way up the row unit down by the deck plates. And that results in a tremendous amount of kernel shatter loss. One of the other major headaches of dealing with down corn that I think Yield Savers help improve is that I rarely have down corn that's all leaning the same way. Sometimes it's sideways to the row and the snouts are trying to stand it up on its way into the head. Sometimes it's leaned over in line with the row, leaning towards the machine or even leaning away from the machine, which can be a special challenge. The stalks lean and collapse at every which angle, especially depending on the time of year that it hit them with. We find that really, especially in the late season, when the stalk has gone down, we get a little swirling windstorm and those stalks are going every which way. One thing that Yield Saver allows me to do is run my deck plates pretty much wide open most of the time. When you're dealing with stalks at every different angle, plugging it becomes a real problem. And you're also running the corn head really low to the ground, which helps make that plugging a regular occurrence. So by opening those deck plates up, we're giving a wider mouth of entry into the row unit. Yield Savers allow us to do that without sacrificing the kernel and the ear loss that we would with a standard chain. The final point I think that's important is that the Yield Savers save small ears, and they do that all the time, whether the corn is standing well or if it's down pretty badly at harvest. You know, those ears that are smaller, we see a lot of those when we have down corn, especially the earlier in the season that it went down, because likely that plant suffered from premature death. So we may have missed the kernel fill period, the plant may have been dead by then, so we're dealing with really small ears, or at some point during kernel fill it went down. But either way, the other thing that we have with corn is we have patches a lot of times, and that's something that we saw a lot of this year. We have patches that are totally flat, and then as you move across the field, patches that are standing a little better. And for us, a lot of times it's hybrid specific. So when you have high variability across each pass, it makes it difficult to be managing all those inputs in the machine all the time. The corn head's just one of those where it's nice to put the Yield Savers on and let them take care of some of the adjustments that need to be made, so you can just set your head up to get as much harvested as safely and easily as possible. I don't think down corn is going away anytime soon for our operation. We do everything we can to manage for it, like fungicide on every acre of corn and aggressively adopting new hybrids to try them out. But when you farm in a high wind zone, it's somewhat inevitable. You know, we use Yield Savers on every acre every year because the kernel savings are obvious, whether the corn's standing or down. But this year it was a tremendous benefit because it allowed me to harvest as normally as possible without having to use a reel or pick in only one direction. And based on my scale tickets compared to my hand yield checks that I took before the windstorm, I left less than 10 bushels in the field in some places that had some really heavy wind damage. So that exceeded my expectations for what I could do. So hopefully Yield Savers would be a good tool for your operation, and I'm convinced that it's hard to pick down corn without them.